The moment the segment went live, tension already filled the air. Inside the CNN studio, the bright panel lights were no match for the firestorm about to erupt between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator J.D. Vance. AOC, in a fitted navy suit and with that unmistakable glare she saves for moments she calls reckonings, sat calmly. But her fingers tapped the desk in a rhythm that warned something was coming. Across from her, Vance adjusted his tie, smirked slightly, and leaned back in his chair like a man who believed the numbers were on his side. The moderator had barely finished his question about welfare programs and class disparity before Vance jumped in. "Let's be honest," he began, his voice measured but smug, "the working poor in this country aren't suffering because of billionaires or Wall Street. They're suffering because of bad policies pushed by people like Ms. Ocasio-Cortez who've never run a business in their life." The camera cut to AOC, still silent. For a second, it seemed like she wouldn't bite. But then she leaned forward, her voice sharp and unwavering. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't you dare talk about the poor like you know their pain. You use their stories to sell books. I walked their streets, knocked on their doors, and organized their unions. I've eaten dinner at their tables. You cashed in. I showed up." The studio froze. The moderator blinked twice, unsure whether to step in. Vance didn't blink at all. "Oh, come on," he said, chuckling. "You're turning this into performance art. The poor don't need poetry, they need opportunity. And your policies kill that." That's when AOC's tone changed. "No more fire. Just ice. You talk about opportunity, Senator, but what you mean is the right to hoard. You defend tax breaks for corporations while calling food stamps dependency. You use dignity as a talking point. I fight for it as a necessity." In that instant, Twitter lit up. Clips were already being clipped. Comments exploded under the live stream. And the moderator? He leaned back and whispered, "We're not even 5 minutes in." The studio, still echoing from AOC's opening barrage, suddenly felt too small for the tension it was housing. The camera panned slowly between the two, Vance now upright in his seat, hands clenched tightly, his jaw locked. He wasn't used to being dressed down, especially not on national television. But he wasn't backing down either. "I don't need to be lectured by someone who treats capitalism like a curse word," Vance shot back. "You talk about the poor like they're helpless, broken souls waiting to be rescued. That mindset doesn't lift people, it traps them." AOC raised an eyebrow, her lips pressing into a faint, amused smile. "You mean like how Wall Street bailed itself out in 2008? That kind of lifting?" The audience chuckled, but AOC wasn't joking. Her next words came with surgical precision. "You pretend to care about working people, JD. But you vote against union protections, against healthcare expansions, against minimum wage increases. You wear your upbringing like armor, but every vote you cast cuts deeper into the communities you claim to represent." Vance leaned forward, his voice tightening. "You don't know anything about me." "I know what you've done," AOC interrupted. "You rose on the back of the working class and then shut the door behind you." Silence again. The moderator cleared his throat, sensing the electricity building in the room. "Let's pivot to economic recovery post-COVID." "No," AOC cut in, still locked on Vance. "Let's not pivot. Let's talk about who gets to recover. Because while we're pivoting, people are choosing between insulin and rent." Vance shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You think you're some kind of moral compass? Your entire platform is built on division." "My platform," AOC replied calmly, "is built on accountability. And if that divides you from your voters, maybe you were never on their side to begin with." Gasps fluttered across the studio. The control room whispered through headsets, prepping for the inevitable trending storm. And somewhere on Capitol Hill, aides were already scrambling to draft statements. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a political battlefield. By the third segment, the moderator was visibly flustered, his cue cards shuffled, the timing lights blinking red, and the control booth whispering frantically in his ear. But AOC wasn't done, and neither was Vance. The camera lingered between them like a referee unsure whether to call a foul or just brace for impact. "You label our policies as radical," AOC began, turning to face the camera now, her voice controlled but laced with steel, "but there's nothing radical about wanting clean water, a livable wage, and breathable air." Vance rolled his eyes. "There's nothing radical about wanting those things. What's radical is your delusion that the government can provide them without bankrupting the country." AOC turned back to him sharply. "You mean like how we magically find billions for wars, for tax cuts to billionaires, but never for schools in the Bronx or hospitals in Appalachia?" That line struck like lightning. Even Vance's expression faltered, just for a second. Then he retaliated. "You're great at slogans, Congresswoman. Terrible at solutions. I offer bills. You offer excuses." Vance leaned forward, voice rising now. "You push utopia with someone else's money. You hand out promises you know can't be kept." AOC stood now, her voice firm, unwavering. "And you sell fear. You tell people that progress will destroy them because you're afraid they'll realize they don't need you anymore." The moderator's hand was halfway to his earpiece, but the producer's voice rang out, "Keep it rolling." Because the live feed wasn't just trending anymore. It was erupting. Social media was ablaze. #AOCVSVance, #political earthquake, #richman's puppet were already climbing the charts. Meanwhile, phones buzzed in both camps. Vance's communications director texted, "Do not storm off." But backstage, an intern watching the screen whispered to no one in particular, "This feels like history." And she was right. Because in this moment, under blinding studio lights, the nation wasn't watching a debate. They were watching a reckoning. The studio's tension had reached critical mass. Every sentence landed like a slap, every silence was louder than applause. The crowd, once subdued, now pulsed with electricity, half leaning forward, the other half gripping their armrests as if to anchor themselves in the storm. J.D. Vance adjusted his tie, but his voice was sharp. "You parade as a voice of the people, AOC. But you spend more time on camera than in committee." She didn't flinch. "I'd rather be on camera telling the truth than behind closed doors selling it." The audience gasped. "You're a social media phenomenon," Vance spat, "not a policymaker. You tweet rage and expect respect. And you cling to the past and call it wisdom," she shot back. "Your vision for America is a black and white photograph in a world that's in full color." It was no longer a debate, it was a full frontal clash of worldviews. Moderators didn't dare interrupt. The control room didn't dare cut to commercial. No one blinked. Vance leaned forward again. "Do you even understand the economic suicide you propose? Do you know what a Green New Deal would cost the American worker? Do you know what not doing it will cost their children?" AOC's voice rose, unshaken. "You talk about dollars, I talk about lives." That landed. The room fell into a brief, electric silence. And then, chaos. A producer in the back accidentally knocked over a clipboard. A boom mic dipped into frame. Someone in the audience began to cry quietly. The screen split, one side showing Vance, jaw clenched, the other, AOC, eyes blazing. And somewhere between their fire, the American public saw a truth they couldn't unsee. This wasn't left versus right anymore. It was future versus fear. The producers were scrambling behind the glass. Ratings were spiking, comment sections were exploding in real time, and hashtags like #AOCVSVance and #TruthOnAir had already begun trending globally. But inside the studio, all of that was invisible. Here, it was just them, two opposing forces, locked in verbal combat, neither willing to blink. AOC leaned in, her voice low but cutting. You know what your problem is, Senator? You think compassion is weakness. But the truth is, it takes far more strength to fight for people than against them. J.D. Vance straightened his spine, but the smirk faded. And you think utopia can be legislated? That shouting louder makes you more right. But the world doesn't run on dreams, it runs on hard work, sacrifice, and reality. Then why does your reality always leave the poor behind? She snapped back. Why does your version of sacrifice always ask the same people to bleed? The studio was silent again. One could hear the faint hum of the lights above, the occasional breath of an audience member afraid to exhale too loudly. And then, an unexpected voice cut through. A retired factory worker, patched in from Ohio through a live viewer call-in segment. His voice was raspy, aged with decades of labor and disappointment. You politicians love to talk, he said. But none of you ever ask us what we need. You just assume. All I know is, I worked 40 years and still can't afford to fix my furnace. AOC's eyes softened. Vance turned his head slightly, taken off guard. Maybe for once, the man added, you two should stop arguing about us, and start listening to us. A pause. And then AOC spoke, without looking at Vance. He's right. But it wasn't surrender. It was a pivot. A challenge. She turned back to the camera, her voice now aimed directly at millions of viewers. This isn't about which of us wins this debate. It's about who finally decides to fight for you. Vance crossed his arms, his jaw tight. That's rich, coming from someone who's spent more time on Instagram Live than at town halls. Don't talk to me about fighting for the people when you've made a brand out of outrage. AOC didn't blink. And you've made a career out of pretending populism and elitism aren't sleeping in the same bed. The crowd stirred. Vance raised his voice now, the first sign that her words had cut. I am the people. I grew up with nothing. I pulled myself out. What did you do, Congresswoman? Get retweets and expect revolution? You pulled yourself out and then pulled the ladder up behind you, she snapped. And yes, I'll take 1,000 retweets if it means waking people up to what you're helping destroy. Moderator voices crackled in the earpieces. One producer whispered to another, we're about to blow past commercial. Do we cut it? The director replied flatly, no. This is history. Vance leaned forward again. You think you're a warrior. But the truth is, you've become exactly what you claim to hate, a political product. Manufactured. Packaged. Marketed. AOC stood up slowly. Not storming off. Not backing down. Just standing, commanding the room. I'd rather be a product of the people, she said, voice clear, than a puppet of billionaires in dark rooms writing your script. The room exploded. Some cheering. Some booing. Some just stunned into silence. And J.D. Vance? He stayed seated, stone still, swallowing a truth he wasn't ready to admit out loud. It was no longer just a debate. It was a reckoning. The studio lights glinted off the polished desk as AOC slowly sat back down, her glare never leaving Vance. The air was thick, so charged it could have sparked flames. The moderator attempted to regain control, but it was too late. The audience wasn't watching a debate anymore. They were watching a collision of ideologies at full speed. Vance tried to regroup. You want to paint me as the enemy of the people because I refuse to sell them fairy tales. But what you call oppression, I call responsibility. You say billionaires write my script, well, who writes yours? Twitter mobs? AOC let the words hang for a moment. Then. They don't write my script. They are the script. Their stories, their struggle. That's who I fight for. You fight for a past that failed them. I fight for a future they haven't given up on. The crowd murmured. Someone in the back whispered, she's turning this into a movement. But Vance wasn't finished. You don't build a future with feelings. You build it with grit. Policy. Discipline. You think slogans will save the economy? No, she said sharply. But maybe if the economy was built to save people instead of profits, we wouldn't need slogans at all. That hit hard. Vance leaned back, visibly rattled. And just then, another voice joined. A high school senior, patched in live from Detroit. Nervous, but burning with conviction. Can I say something? She asked. Both candidates nodded, surprised. I'm 18. I can't afford college. My mom works 3 jobs. My little brother's inhaler costs more than our rent. I don't need another lecture. I need someone to care. The studio froze. AOC looked at her and simply said, "We hear you." And for the first time in the entire show, J.D. Vance looked shaken, not by AOC, but by the weight of a truth even he couldn't debate away. The silence in the studio was heavier than any insult hurled that night. The teen's voice had sliced through the theatrics, the soundbites, the showmanship, and left only the raw truth standing. AOC turned to Vance, her tone suddenly lower, quieter, but sharper than ever. That's not a radical. That's a kid. A kid asking us why survival feels like a lottery ticket in the richest country on earth. Vance inhaled through his nose, his face a mix of defensiveness and discomfort. I get it. I've lived it. But empathy without strategy is just noise. She leaned in. And strategy without empathy? That's policy written in a vacuum, soulless and dangerous. The moderator, sensing the stakes had evolved, dropped the pretense of neutrality. We've talked immigration, taxes, healthcare, but maybe the real question is this: which of you is willing to be changed by what you hear? The question hit like a thunderclap. Vance looked to the floor. AOC looked at the crowd. And then, something unexpected happened. The teenager's video feed came back on, this time uninvited, an honest glitch the producers didn't stop. You all keep talking about us, she said, but we're not just some symbol for your battles. We're watching. We're voting. And we remember. AOC nodded slowly, then addressed her, not Vance. Good. Don't forget. Make us earn every word we speak. J.D. Vance finally spoke, his voice softer than before. You want truth? The system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it was built, to keep power where it is. And for a fleeting second, the audience didn't see enemies. They saw 2 people, trapped in a machine too big for either to break alone. But one of them was still fighting to tear it down. And the other? Still deciding if he should. The camera panned slowly across the studio, faces frozen, not in disagreement, but in something far more unnerving, reflection. This wasn't just political theater anymore. It was a reckoning, live and unscripted. AOC broke the silence. You said the system works as designed. That's the most honest thing you've said all night. But here's what you left out, JD, it was designed without people like her in mind. Without people like me. Without most of us. Vance didn't flinch. You think burning the system down fixes it? You think revolution guarantees justice? What replaces it? Hashtags and hope. No, AOC replied, her voice now steady and cutting. But pretending the current system isn't burning people alive? That's the real delusion. The audience gasped. Some clapped. Others watched in stunned silence. AOC leaned forward. You call me an idealist, like it's a curse. But maybe idealism is the only antidote left to your kind of cynicism. Then came the moderator's closing question, the one they'd both dreaded. If you had to choose between being popular and being right, Which would you pick? Vance blinked. AOC didn't. I'd rather lose for the truth, she said, than win with a lie. Vance hesitated, the weight of his answer pressing on him like 1,000 eyes. I'd rather fix what's broken, he finally muttered, than burn it all down. The audience didn't erupt. They didn't cheer. They listened. And in that rare moment of quiet, it was clear, the debate wasn't over. But something had undeniably shifted. In them. In us. The debate was over, but no one moved. The lights dimmed slightly as the credits began to roll on the studio screen, yet not a single viewer, at home or in the room, looked away. Something electric had just happened, and everyone knew it. Backstage, AOC pulled off her microphone with a snap. Her team surrounded her, some offering congratulations, others warning that the backlash was already brewing. I wasn't trying to go viral, she said, almost to herself. I was trying to get through to them. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance stood alone by the exit curtain, his jaw tense, hands in his pockets. One of his aides approached cautiously. You want to say anything to the press? He shook his head. They'll twist it either way. Let it speak for itself. Across the country, the fallout began instantly. Clips of the exchange flooded social media. Some called AOC a hero, finally saying what millions had felt for years. Others declared Vance the voice of realism, a man refusing to bow to populist rage. But in living rooms, on trains, in cafes, and classrooms, the real conversation had already started. Parents asked their kids what justice should look like. Young people Googled terms they'd heard for the first time. Teachers rewrote Monday's lesson plan. And on Capitol Hill? The ripple was just beginning. Because no matter what side people landed on, one thing was certain, they weren't forgetting what they had just witnessed. AOC didn't just slam a senator. She cracked the wall. And somewhere deep inside the system, something began to shift. Not loud. Not fast. But real. What started as a studio debate turned into a national reckoning. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't just challenge J.D. Vance, she challenged a system. And when he pushed back, the room went silent. This wasn't just a clash of words. It was a battle over what America stands for. Are we just spectators? Or are we ready to be part of the change?